I've lived in this town my whole life, long enough to know its rhythms. Days passed slow here, like they had to drag themselves across the cracked pavement and dusty porches before finally giving way to night. It wasn't the kind of place where much happened. The loudest thing most evenings was the train cutting across the edge of town, or a dog barking at some shadow that wasn't there. Stray dogs were always part of the scenery, half-wild mutts that slept under gas station awnings or picked through trash behind the diner. Nobody gave them much thought. You'd see them wandering, ribs sharp under their fur, tails between their legs, nothing more than background noise in a town that was already fading. That's why I didn't think twice at first when I saw the thing by the stop sign. Just another stray sitting there in the heat shimmer of an August afternoon. But something made me slow my step, squint through the haze, because its posture was all wrong. Its body faced away from me, tail and hind legs pointing toward town. But its head was turned completely around, jaws slack, tongue lolling from a mouth full of broken yellow teeth, eyes staring right at me without blinking. I froze, half a block down, sweat sliding into my eyes. It didn't move. The body didn't shift, didn't so much as twitch an ear, but the head tracked me as I stood there, fixed and glassy. The fur around its neck looked torn, raw, like something had twisted it too far and left it dangling. I thought maybe it had been hit by a car, broken its spine, but there it was, upright, its legs steady beneath it. Jesus, I muttered without thinking, and the sound seemed to pull it tighter into focus. Its jaws opened, just slightly, not like a bark or growl, more like a hinge creaking open. A string of saliva fell onto the pavement and sizzled in the heat. I took a step back, and that was enough. The body didn't turn, but the thing moved toward me. The head bobbed stiffly, staring back over its own back as the paws clicked against the asphalt. Its movements were jerky, halting, like each step was a decision, not an instinct. That's when I heard the screen door slam across the street. "Don't!" someone shouted. A kid, maybe 7 or 8, tore down the porch steps in a pair of mud-crusted sneakers, eyes wide with the kind of excitement only children have when they see a dog. He ran straight for it, hand outstretched, laughing as though this was just another mutt to be tamed with kindness. "Hey, stop!" I called, but he was too fast. The thing didn't move away. It waited. The boy's hand hovered just inches from its muzzle when the jaws snapped backward with a crack that echoed like a branch breaking in winter. He screamed, stumbling as blood ran down his fingers. He'd pulled back fast enough to save his hand, but not before the teeth had cut deep into the meat between his thumb and wrist. The boy fell hard on the pavement, clutching his arm and wailing. The dog's body still faced away, but its head lifted higher, mouth working open and shut like it was testing the air for something better. I ran forward, adrenaline pulling me out of the daze, and scooped the kid up under his armpits. His blood was hot and slicked down my forearm. The thing didn't chase. It stood staring at me over its backward shoulder, head cocked like it was measuring the distance between us. The boy's mother screamed from the porch, rushing down with a dish towel already in her hands. She pulled him from me, pressing the fabric hard against the wound while he kicked and sobbed against her chest. I stepped back, breathing hard, trying to process what I'd just seen. "What the hell is that?" I asked her. Her eyes flicked past me, to the stop sign. The thing was gone. That night, word spread quick. Everyone was talking about the broken-necked dog, as people called it, though half the town dismissed it as a story blown out of proportion. The boy's injury was chalked up to a stray gone rabid. Happens sometimes. Nobody wanted to think too hard about how a rabid dog could twist its neck 180 degrees and still walk around like nothing was wrong. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw its jaws snap shut, the way it moved without moving right, as if something inside it was pulling the strings wrong. By morning, I wasn't the only one who'd seen it. A farmer on the edge of town said it had been in his fields, scaring the cattle into breaking fences. Another claimed it sat on his porch all night, staring in through the screen door. And then someone else swore they'd seen two of them, side by side, their heads both turned backward, staring at the moon. The dogs weren't just wandering, they were multiplying. On the third day, I heard bones crack before I saw it. I was walking back from the grocery store with a bag of milk and bread when the sound stopped me cold. A low, wet pop, like someone breaking knuckles, but louder, heavier. The smell hit me next, wet fur, copper, rot. In the alley between Murphy's Hardware and the laundromat, a backward dog stood over the corpse of a normal one. The dead dog's stomach was open, ribs cracked apart like a broken cage. The backward one had its head dipped into the cavity, chewing, its whole skull jerking unnaturally every time it pulled loose another bite. Its eyes rolled up and found me without lifting its muzzle from the carcass. Strings of pink meat stretched from its jaws. I dropped the bag. Milk exploded across the sidewalk, and the bottle rolled into the street, but I didn't care. My legs moved before my brain could catch up, running until my lungs burned and my throat filled with the taste of iron. That night, more people swore they saw them. Packs of them this time, stalking the outskirts of town, killing strays, tearing into deer. Someone claimed they found a pile of animal corpses arranged under the old water tower. The next morning, a man with a rifle tried to prove they were just animals. It happened outside the diner. The dog was sitting in the middle of Main Street, body turned toward the grocery store, head staring at the glass window where kids pressed their faces to watch. The man leveled his rifle from the hood of his truck and fired once. The bullet hit. I saw fur spray and the head jerk back. For a moment, I thought he'd done it. Then came the sound. Another crack, louder, wetter, and the head twisted even farther, the spine tearing through the skin in a white spear. Blood sprayed down its shoulders. The head hung lower now, almost upside down, but the eyes still burned with that glassy, fixed stare. It started walking. The man fired again and again. Bullets punched into its chest, its ribs, its stomach. Flesh ripped, bone shattered. It didn't matter. The thing kept moving forward, blood pattering onto the asphalt. By the time it reached him, the man was screaming. He tried to reload, fingers fumbling, but the dog's jaws snapped shut around his thigh. The crack was loud enough to make my teeth ache. He went down, screaming higher now, blood pumping in thick ropes across the hood of his own truck. People scattered, some ran, some stood frozen, too shocked to move. I couldn't stop watching as the dog dragged him into the middle of the street, tearing through him with those backward jaws. The screaming didn't last long. By the time anyone thought to move, the man was spread open across the asphalt, ribs cracked apart like the strays, guts shining in the noon sun. The dog sat down in the gore, its chest heaving, face drenched red. Its eyes never left us. After that day on Main Street, nobody argued anymore about whether the dogs were real. The whole town had seen the man torn apart in broad daylight. His blood had been hosed off the pavement, but you could still see the stains, dark outlines in the cracks of the road. People stopped walking at night, stopped letting their kids out, stopped pretending this was some problem animal control could fix. But the dogs didn't stop coming. By the end of the week, they were everywhere. Big ones, small ones, mutts with patchy fur, old hounds with their heads hanging loose by tendons. Some limped on broken legs, their bodies mangled like roadkill, but still moving. Every one of them had that same impossible twist, that same grotesque backward stare that followed you no matter where you stood. I started noticing the sound before I saw them. Bones popping, wet cracks echoing off brick walls, like something dislocating itself over and over just to keep moving. They traveled in twos, then threes, then whole packs, their heads all facing different directions, but their bodies flowing together. They moved like a school of fish, parting and circling without a sound but the clicking of claws on pavement. When they wanted to kill, you didn't hear barking. You heard ripping, crunching, the dull thump of bodies hitting the ground. It wasn't just strays anymore. They started going after pets. Mrs. Callahan's shepherd was the first. She screamed loud enough for half the block to hear when she found him in the yard, sprawled out with his stomach peeled open and his insides spilling into the grass. Her porch light burned all night afterward, but the dog still came back, circling her property until she boarded herself in with plywood. The Thompsons' cat disappeared next. One of their kids found its collar in a pile with bird feathers and half a raccoon behind the fire station. They said the piles kept getting bigger, neat little stacks of corpses like someone had been collecting for a bonfire. The police tried to act like they had control. They drove up and down the streets with their sirens cutting through the night, spotlights flashing into alleys, but the packs just melted into the shadows, reappearing somewhere else. One of the deputies bragged that he'd hit one with his cruiser, dragged it 50 feet under the bumper. He showed us the blood still fresh on the grill. 2 nights later, they found his cruiser idling on the edge of town, the driver's side door hanging open. He wasn't inside. The front seat was soaked through, but the body was gone. That's when people stopped calling them dogs. On Saturday, I saw something I'll never forget. I was cutting across the lot behind Murphy's Hardware when I heard a low growl. Not normal, not the kind you hear when a dog warns you off. This was deeper, vibrating, like something trying to imitate a growl but getting it wrong. I ducked behind a rusted-out truck bed and peeked over. There were 3 of them, tearing apart a normal stray, its legs still twitching as they dragged it open. But it wasn't the killing that froze me. It was what they did after. They started arranging the pieces. One pulled the front legs into a neat line. Another dropped the head beside it. The third carried the hindquarters around and set them down like it was placing a loaf of bread on a counter. Their own heads stayed twisted backward, watching all directions at once, but their bodies worked with purpose. When they were finished, the parts lay in a perfect square, blood leaking into the dirt in symmetrical pools. One of them lifted its head and let out a sound I still can't describe. A howl, but not right. Choked, rewound, like someone was playing it backward on a broken tape deck. The other 2 joined in, their voices layering into a noise that made my stomach flip. I bolted, not caring how loud my steps were. When I got home, I shoved a chair under the doorknob, nailed shut the back window in the kitchen, and sat with a hammer in my hand until the sun came up. The next morning, the farmer who lived on the east side of town was found in his field. His cattle had broken through the fence again, but they weren't running loose. They were dead, every one of them. Some were gutted, some chewed down to ribs, some stacked in neat, towering piles that leaned against fence posts like macabre scarecrows. The farmer himself was nearby, spread out in the dirt. His chest cavity was open, ribs snapped, arms twisted behind him at angles that didn't make sense. His face was still locked in a scream, lips pulled back, jaw broken. Crows sat on the fence tearing at what the dogs had left. That same day, the sheriff called a town meeting. People filled every seat in City Hall, the air thick with sweat and fear. Nobody looked at each other. Every eye was on the sheriff as he stood at the front, one hand gripping the podium like he'd fall without it. "I don't know what the hell these things are," he said. His voice cracked halfway through. "But they aren't natural. I've been here 42 years, and I've never seen anything like this. Shooting doesn't kill them. Traps don't hold them. We can't predict them. We can't stop them." Murmurs broke out, rising until people were shouting. Some demanded the National Guard. Some wanted to flee. Others screamed that leaving was suicide, that the dogs would tear anyone apart on the open road. The sheriff raised his voice over the noise. "What we know is this: they're killing more each night. They're getting bolder. We can't wait for help that might never come. Anyone who's got a gun, you're deputized. Barricade your homes. Stay inside after dark. And for God's sake, don't go near them." The crowd left in pieces, some weeping, some arguing, most silent. But it didn't matter what he said. By the time night fell, the dogs had already gathered again. I heard them before I saw them. Claws scraping asphalt, bones popping, that awful backward howl splitting the air. I looked out my window and saw at least 20 of them lined across Main Street. They didn't run or scatter this time. They sat in rows, staring at the houses with their heads turned back, eyes glowing in the streetlights. Across the street, Mr. Benson cracked his door and stepped out with a shotgun. His wife begged him from inside, her voice trembling, but he shook her off. "They're just dogs," he muttered. He raised the shotgun, hand steady. Fired once, the blast lit up the street, echoing down the block. One of the things jerked as pellets tore through its side. It staggered but didn't fall. Instead, it twisted, neck bones snapping so loud I could hear it from my porch. Its head spun all the way around until the jaws faced the ceiling, tongue lolling against its own spine. Then it lunged. Benson fired again, but it was already on him. The shotgun dropped, his teeth sank into his shoulder, tearing away a chunk of flesh. He screamed, staggered, tried to fight back, but more of them were moving now, bounding across lawns. They swarmed him, their bodies colliding into a mass of snapping jaws and twisting necks. His screams went high, then cut short. By the time they pulled away, what was left of him barely resembled a man. His chest was open, his arms shredded, one leg missing entirely. They left him in the street, steaming under the yellow glow of the lamps. The pack sat back down calmly, as though nothing had happened, their eyes locked on the houses again, waiting. I slid down against the wall, shaking so hard I thought my bones might rattle out of place. By the next night, they weren't in the street in rows anymore. They were everywhere. When I looked out my window, I counted more than 30, moving in packs across the lawns, circling cars, sitting on porches like they lived there. Every time the headlights of a passing car cut across them, their bodies stiffened, but their heads turned toward the light, jaws opening in silent snaps. The sound of them was constant now, that sharp, irregular crack of bone as necks bent further than they should, the wet, grinding noise of joints twisting out of place. It echoed off the houses, rattled in the drains. Sometimes in the distance, I'd hear them chewing. You didn't mistake it for anything else. Chewing has a rhythm, a wet insistence. And when you realized it wasn't on food but on something bigger, heavier, it was hard to breathe. And then came the howling. The first time it happened, I thought the sirens were back, a rising, keening wail that layered and bent out of tune until it warped into something else entirely. It wasn't a howl, not really. It was like every throat was producing noise backward, dragging the sound inside out. 30 voices shrieking in reverse. It rolled down the streets, vibrated the glass in my windows, made my stomach flip like I was about to vomit. People said they couldn't stand it for more than a minute before bleeding from their noses. Babies screamed until they passed out. Dogs that weren't twisted howled until their throats split. The packs would howl together at midnight, then fall silent all at once, their heads turning in unison toward some unseen point on the horizon. No one wanted to know what they were listening for. That's when the disappearances started. It wasn't like the deputy, vanishing with his cruiser left idling. This time, it was close, personal. The farmer, then Benson, then Callahan's shepherd. That was violence, that was slaughter. But now they were taking people whole. I woke up to the sound of screaming 2 houses down. I pressed my face to the glass and saw shadows thrashing behind Mrs. Donnelly's curtains. Then her front door opened, not kicked in, not broken, just swinging wide like she'd invited them in. A dozen backward dogs poured out, blood streaking their fur, and she was gone. The next morning, people went inside. The house was spotless. No blood, no broken furniture, no signs of struggle. It was as if she'd never lived there. Only her slippers remained, sitting neatly at the bottom of the stairs. The same thing happened again the next night, and the night after that. Whole families gone. Houses stripped of noise, left perfect and empty. Not everyone waited to be taken. A man named Hal tried to run. He piled his wife and 2 kids into their minivan and tore out of his driveway so fast the tires screamed. He hit one of the dogs head on at the corner and kept going, the body snapping under the wheels. For a second I thought he might make it, I saw his headlights vanish into the distance, then nothing. Minutes later, the van reappeared at the edge of town. The headlights were still on, the horn blaring, but it was rolling slow, like something was pushing it. When it came close enough, I saw the truth. The windshield was smeared with blood from the inside. The kid's seats were empty. His wife's door was open, swinging. Hal himself was slumped behind the wheel, his head twisted almost completely backward, mouth open in a silent scream. The van kept rolling until it hit a lamppost and stopped. Nobody went near it. By Sunday morning, the sheriff's words meant nothing. There weren't enough deputies left to matter. People stopped pretending they could fight. Guns didn't work, traps didn't work, cars didn't work. The town was shrinking, house by house, family by family, into silence. I went out once, just once. It was around dawn, when the pack seemed thinnest. I wanted to see if the rumors about the water tower were true. They said the dogs had been dragging their kills there, stacking them higher than a man could see. I cut through alleys, heart hammering, hammer in my hand like it would do any good. The air stank of rot and iron, of wet fur and shit. By the time I reached the clearing under the tower, the sun was high enough to see everything. The rumors hadn't been lies. There were piles of bodies, not just animals anymore, people. I saw limbs tangled with deer legs, a man's head resting against a cow's ribcage, torsos stacked on top of one another in neat columns. The skin was pale and waxy, blood soaking into the dirt in dark halos. Some faces were frozen in screams, mouths stretched wide. Others were chewed down to bone, sockets empty. And around the base of the tower the dogs sat, dozens of them. Some licked themselves clean, others gnawed on arms or spines, the sound of teeth scraping bone sharp in the air. Their heads all faced me, even the ones still feeding, jaws working mechanically as they stared. Then one of them stood. It was bigger than the rest, its body lanky and stretched, ribs showing through torn skin. Its head twisted slow, bones grinding like dry gears until its face was upside down, eyes staring out from between its own shoulder blades. Blood ran down its neck, dripping from the torn flesh around the exposed spine. It opened its mouth and let out the reversed howl. The others followed. I ran. I didn't care who heard me. My footsteps echoed, my breath rattled in my chest, and still the sound followed me, that chorus of backward noise, chasing me through the streets. I didn't stop until I was home, door slammed, chair jammed under the knob. Later that night, they came closer than they ever had. I heard them outside my house, claws dragging along the siding, jaws snapping shut with sharp cracks. I pressed myself against the floor, too scared to look through the blinds. A shadow crossed the glass, then another, then another. I could hear them breathing, wet and ragged just feet away. And then came the scream. Not mine, not anyone in my house. From across the street, I risked a glance and saw the O'Connor place lit up like a lantern. Their front door was open. Shadows thrashed inside, the sound of breaking furniture, shouts cut off mid-breath. The dogs weren't waiting anymore. They were inside, moving through rooms like they owned them. One of the O'Connor boys ran out the back door, his shirt torn open, blood streaking his chest. He made it 3 steps before they were on him. A dozen of them, piling onto him with snapping jaws and twisting necks. He screamed once, shrill and desperate, before the sound was cut off. The dogs dragged him into the street, their bodies moving in strange, synchronized bursts. They didn't just kill him. They pulled him apart piece by piece, then arranged him in the middle of the asphalt, arms straight out to the sides, legs splayed downward, head twisted around until it faced the wrong way, mouth gaping open. It looked like a crucifix, built from flesh and bone. The dogs sat in a circle around it, silent, staring, as the boys' blood pooled under their paws. I stayed there on the floor until dawn, shaking, listening to the silence after the feast. By Monday morning, half the town was gathered in the square, called there by desperate word of mouth. People clutched rifles, bats, pipes, Anything that felt heavy enough to matter, though we all knew none of it did. Faces were pale, eyes ringed dark from nights without sleep. The stink of sweat and fear hung thick in the humid air. The sheriff stood on the courthouse steps again, only this time there were fewer deputies flanking him. 3, maybe 4 left. The rest were gone, scattered, torn apart, or vanished into the dark like the O'Connors. He raised a hand to quiet the crowd, though nobody really listened until he fired a round into the air. The crack rolled across the rooftops, and for a heartbeat the town held its breath. "We can't stay like this," he said. "We've tried holding out. We've tried shooting. We've tried barricading. It's not working. Every night more of them. Every night more of us gone. We can't wait anymore. We're leaving this town." Shouts broke out immediately, some relieved, others angry, most terrified. A woman near me screamed that leaving was exactly what they wanted. A man countered that staying was suicide. Someone else yelled about their kids. It was chaos, the sound of panic finally cracking open after days of being bottled. The sheriff bellowed over them, voice breaking. "Convoys. We go in groups. Cars, trucks, whatever you've got. Nobody goes alone. We move now while there's daylight." That was enough to set people in motion. Engines roared to life across the square, trunks slammed, kids dragged into back seats, doors slammed like gunfire. The crowd split into frantic lines of vehicles, engines coughing, fumes filling the air. I didn't join them. Not yet. Something about the sheriff's voice shook me. His eyes were wild, darting at every shadow like he already knew it wouldn't work. The first convoy left down Route 7, a line of minivans and pickups kicking up dust. We all watched them go, hope trailing like smoke behind them. It was maybe 20 minutes before the first car came back. A sedan rolled into view, creeping slow, driver's side door hanging open. It drifted into the square and bumped against a fire hydrant. The engine was still running. Inside, there was no one. Not a trace of the family that had piled into it. Only the seats soaked red and handprints smeared across the windows from the inside. People screamed. Someone ran forward, pulled the door wider, gagged at the stink of blood. He stepped back, shaking his head over and over. Then more cars came back. One pickup, bed empty, windshield cracked, the driver's seat covered in something dark and wet. A van, its side door open, stuffed animals scattered across the floor, no children inside. A station wagon rolled in without a sound, its headlights still on, blood dripping from the tailgate in a thin, steady line. Every vehicle returned. None of the people did. The square emptied fast after that. Families bolted back to their houses, slamming doors, dragging furniture against them. Guns were clutched tighter. Voices rose into arguments, and the panic thickened into something heavier than fear. It felt like suffocation, like the whole town was collapsing inward. I went back to my own house, hammer still tucked under my arm, though it felt laughable by now. I bolted every door, every window, and sat in the dark, waiting for the sounds to start again. And when night fell, they did. The howling rose at midnight, louder than ever, 30 or 40 voices all bending backward through the air. The walls shook. My ears rang. I pressed my palms against my head until it felt like my skull would crack. Still the sound kept going, digging into bone. It stopped all at once. Then came the scratching. First on the street, claws clicking and scraping pavement. Then closer along the siding of my house. A slow drag, nails leaving gouges in the wood. Shadows passed across the slats of light leaking through my boarded windows. I held my breath. Somewhere outside, a scream split the night. Not the panicked shout of someone being chased. Longer, raw, full of tearing agony. Then another, cut off with a wet gurgle. I bit my fist to keep quiet, knuckles grinding against my teeth. The next morning, I saw the bodies. 2 men were sprawled in the middle of Main Street, their torsos split open, ribs forced upward like cages. Their arms were twisted back, dislocated, arranged so their hands pointed in opposite directions. One still had his face intact, eyes rolled white, lips peeled back from broken teeth. The other's head was gone, neck stump dark and hollow. Around them, dogs sat in a perfect circle, silent, staring at anyone who dared to look out their windows. Nobody came to move the bodies. By noon, the air was heavy with rot. Crows circled overhead but wouldn't land. That afternoon, I heard the crack of another gunshot. I peered through the blinds and saw a deputy, one of the last, standing in the street with a revolver. His uniform was torn, blood staining the sleeve. His hand shook as he fired at the nearest dog. The bullet tore through its side. It stumbled, twisted its neck until bones splintered, then lunged. The deputy fired again and again until the chamber clicked empty. He tried to reload, fumbling with trembling hands, but the pack surged forward. They hit him like a wave, dragging him down into a mess of teeth and claws. His scream choked off into silence within seconds. When they pulled back, only shreds were left. Strips of blue fabric fluttered in the wind, clinging to teeth and claws. The circle of dogs widened, their heads turning outward now, scanning the houses like they knew we were watching. I dropped to the floor, shaking, bile rising in my throat. It didn't stop there. By dusk, the power cut out. One block, then another, then the whole town swallowed in darkness. The hum of refrigerators, the buzz of lights, all gone. Houses became silent tombs. I lit a candle and sat on the floor, back against the wall, hammer across my knees, my ears strained for every sound outside. Claws, jaws snapping shut, low, wet chewing, and beneath it all the steady rhythm of bones breaking, like wood popping in a fire. Somewhere down the street, glass shattered. A woman's scream cut through the night. A child wailed, then silence again, thick and complete. I don't know how long I sat there. Hours maybe. Time lost meaning. At some point I heard the sound of wheels. I crept to the window and peeked through a crack in the boards. Cars were coming back again, the ones from the second convoy. Rolling slow, engines sputtering, headlights glowing weak in the dark. I counted 6 vehicles all drifting into town. No drivers, no passengers, just empty shells soaked in red. One car coasted into a streetlight and stopped. The windshield was caved in, smeared with handprints from the inside. Another bumped against a fence, rocking slightly, its trunk dripping steadily onto the ground. Behind them, dogs padded in silence. Dozens, maybe more, their heads twisted back, eyes fixed on the houses where people hid. They didn't attack. Not yet. They just escorted the cars back into town, depositing them like trophies. I backed away from the window and pressed myself flat against the floor, the hammer slick in my grip. My chest heaved, sweat poured down my back, and still I couldn't breathe right. The convoy had failed. The town was trapped. By the next morning, it was impossible to ignore how many of them there were. What had been scattered packs of a dozen or so were now swarms. Every street had them, every corner. They perched on porches, lined fences, padded across rooftops like feral cats. When you looked out your window, you didn't see emptiness anymore. You saw them, motionless but watching, their heads twisted so the glassy eyes locked on you wherever you stood. I tested it once. I moved from one side of the window to the other, crouching low, then standing, shifting left, right. Their bodies didn't turn, their legs didn't budge. But every head in view rotated in slow, jerking increments until all those eyes pinned me again no matter where I went. It wasn't coincidence. It wasn't animal instinct. It was deliberate. By afternoon, they were clogging the main roads. I peeked through the blinds and saw them stretch shoulder to shoulder down the highway out of town, their bodies forming a living barricade. Rows of twisted necks, jaws opening and shutting in silent clicks. A man named Reed tried to force his way through. He had an old pickup with a snowplow rigged to the front. He roared down the street, horn blaring, plow lowered. The first line of dogs shattered under the steel, their bodies thrown aside like broken dolls. But they didn't stay down. Even as blood sprayed across the windshield, they were pulling themselves upright again, spines protruding, heads dangling. More surged forward from the ditches, clambering onto the hood, their backward jaws snapping against the glass. The truck swerved, crashed into a ditch, and flipped onto its side. The horn blared once, then cut out. The pack closed over it like ants. When they pulled away, only strips of clothing fluttered in the weeds. After that, nobody tried the roads. By nightfall, they were in the yards. I watched from my upstairs window as they lined my fence, every slat marked by a dog sitting stiff, heads turned back, eyes gleaming in the porch light. The sight made my throat close up. It was too ordered, too symmetrical, like soldiers at attention, waiting for a command. My neighbor across the way, a man named Trask, couldn't take it anymore. I saw him storm onto his porch with a lantern in one hand and an axe in the other, shouting at them to get the hell off his property. His wife begged him from the doorway, but he shook her off, voice cracking with fury. "Come on then," he roared, swinging the axe. "You bastards want me? Come on!" The pack didn't move, not at first. Their heads all shifted together, clicking sideways, eyes fixing on him. Then one stood, another, then 10, then 20, all stepping forward in perfect rhythm. Trask swung the axe down on the first that lunged at the steps. The blade split its skull with a wet crack, burying deep. The dog dropped, but the others surged over it, jaws snapping. Trask roared, swinging again, the lantern light flashing across his sweat-soaked face. He cleaved another in two, the axe sticking in its ribs. Then they were on him. The lantern shattered as his wife screamed from the doorway. Shadows whipped across the yard, snarls and cracking bones filling the air. His axe arm vanished into the mass. His scream rose once, then broke into gurgles. When the pack pulled back, his body was spread across the porch steps in strips, blood soaking into the wood. His wife never screamed again. The dogs vanished into the night, leaving the lantern glass glittering in the dark. That was when I realized they weren't just killing anymore. They were making examples. Every time someone tried to fight, tried to run, tried to resist, the pack left what was left of them in full view, arranged, displayed. The bodies weren't scattered or left in piles, they were positioned. Ribs cracked open like cages, heads twisted backward like theirs, arms stretched outward like broken wings. I couldn't eat, couldn't drink, couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined their heads turning toward me again, jaws snapping backward, spines popping, and then they came closer. That night, I heard claws scratching my front steps, slow at first, then faster, a tapping rhythm that built into a frenzy. I pressed myself flat on the floor, hammer clutched tight, breath strangled in my throat. The scratching stopped. I forced myself to look. Through the gap in the blinds, I saw them, dozens of them, filling my yard, pressed against the porch, heads twisted, jaws opening and shutting in silence. Their eyes were all on me. I could feel it, a weight pressing into my chest, and then, as one, they moved. Every head turned sideways, every jaw snapped open at once, the sound like gunfire cracking through the night. I bit my fist to stop myself from crying out. They didn't come in, not yet. They just sat there until dawn, jaws clacking, head swiveling, eyes never leaving mine. When the sun finally rose, they melted away into the alleys and back streets, leaving only claw marks etched deep into the porch wood. I thought maybe that was the end of it. Maybe they'd had their fill. But when I looked out again at noon, they were back, stretched across the street in rows, their bodies forming walls, blocking every exit from town. That was when I realized something worse than anything else. No matter where I went, no matter what window I looked through, every single one of those twisted heads was already facing me. I didn't leave the upstairs window for hours, barely blinking, waiting for the packs to shift, for something to break the spell of their eyes fixed on me. The longer I stared, the more I realized their movements weren't random. There was a rhythm, a pattern to the way their heads clicked and twisted, one by one, like a wave. Each dog tilted its skull a fraction to the side, then back again, bones snapping sharp in the silence, and then, all at once, every single head turned together, not toward me, not toward any of the houses, toward the woods beyond the highway. The motion was too clean, too precise, as though a signal had passed through them. The rows of bodies remained perfectly still, but the heads all faced that single point, jaws opening slightly, a low, rattling hiss escaping dozens of throats in unison. A second later, they all fell silent. Heads remained fixed toward the trees. The silence was heavier than their howls. That night, people started disappearing. The first I knew about was the Millers. They lived 3 doors down, husband, wife, and 2 kids. I hadn't heard a thing, not a scream, not a crash. But by morning, their front door was ajar, swaying gently in the breeze. I forced myself to look. The house was pristine, dishes stacked neatly in the sink, lights off, beds made, but no Millers, no blood, no signs of a break-in. The only thing out of place was the family photos. The frames were empty, glass cracked, photographs missing. Later that afternoon, the Whitakers vanished. Same story. Their house stood open, curtains fluttering, kitchen light still burning. Inside, nothing. No bodies, no struggle, just absence. It was as though the dogs didn't need to kill anymore. They were simply collecting. I heard voices that evening outside City Hall. People had gathered again, what was left of them. Maybe a third of the town, faces drawn tight, eyes hollow. Nobody was shouting now. Nobody had energy for rage. They're taking people, someone whispered. They come into the houses, they don't break anything. They just take. We have to do something. We can't just sit here. Do what? Another spat. Run? You saw the roads. Fight? You saw what happened to Reed. Pray. God stopped listening when those things showed up. I didn't stay. Their words were just noise. Nothing made sense anymore. The air felt thinner every day, like the town was hollowing out. That night, I lay on the floor by the window, watching. The dogs gathered earlier than usual, lining the street before the sun had fully set. Their numbers had doubled again, rows upon rows, stretching so far I couldn't see the end. At exactly midnight, every head snapped up at once. The sound was deafening, bones cracking in unison like a forest of trees splitting in a storm. Then they all turned, slowly, deliberately, toward the houses on the east side of town. I saw lights flicker on in those homes, curtains shift, figures moving inside, unsure of what was happening. The dogs began to walk, not run, not rush, walk. Dozens of them, their backward heads swaying in unison, paws clicking against the asphalt in perfect rhythm. They padded silently toward the east side, disappearing behind houses. I pressed my ear to the wall, heart pounding. There were no screams, no breaking glass, just silence. Hours later, they returned, still walking in unison, their heads twisted back to face every window, every person watching. Their fur was slick and shining in the moonlight, but not with blood. Water maybe, sweat, something oily that left dark trails down their flanks. The houses they had visited were dark now, curtains open, lights off. By morning, the east side of town was empty. Not just the people, everything. No furniture, no pictures, no signs those houses had ever been lived in. As if they'd been scrubbed clean of human presence overnight. I saw one man wandering in the street around noon, muttering to himself. He looked broken, eyes wide and wet, hands shaking so badly he could barely stand. They took her, he mumbled, right out of bed. She didn't scream. She just stood up. Walked out the door with them, like she wanted to, like she belonged to them. He staggered off before anyone could stop him. That night, he was gone too. By the middle of the week, half the town had vanished. The rest of us sat barricaded inside our homes, waiting for our turn. I tried to stay awake, to listen for the signs, but exhaustion broke me. Sometime after midnight, I dozed in my chair, hammer slipping from my grip. When I opened my eyes again, the room was too quiet. I forced myself up, joints aching, and peered through the blinds. They were back, lined across the street, stretching into the distance. But this time, they weren't facing me. Every head was tilted upward, bones strained and popping, as jaws opened wide toward the sky. The sound came next. Not a howl this time, not even backward noise. Just breathing, dozens, maybe hundreds, of dogs breathing together, heavy and wet, rattling through twisted throats. The sound filled the air, vibrating in my chest until I thought my ribs might crack from the pressure. Then it stopped. All at once, every head snapped down and turned toward my house. I dropped to the floor, choking on bile. My skin crawled. I pressed myself flat, too scared to breathe, hammer shaking in my grip. No scratching came, no howling. They didn't need to. They knew I was next. The next night I started barricading. I dragged every piece of furniture I had to the front door. Couch, dresser, even the fridge, its motor whining as I tilted it on its side. I nailed shut the windows with warped planks from the shed, hands shaking so badly I bent half the nails crooked. My palms blistered from hammering, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. Every sound outside carried like a warning. A single claw on asphalt, a jaw snapping shut, the shifting of dozens of paws. They were gathering again. I could feel it. By dusk, the house was a tomb. Only the faint light of a candle flickered against the walls, the air thick with sweat and wax. I sat on the floor with the hammer across my knees, staring at the boards nailed over the window. The scratching began just after dark. It started on the siding, claws dragging slow, deliberate lines down the wood. The sound scraped into me, vibrating my teeth. I clenched my jaw, gripping the hammer tighter. Then the scratching came from the back wall, then the sides. I realized they weren't pacing anymore. They were circling. I forced myself to peek through a narrow crack between two boards. What I saw made my throat close. They were everywhere. Not in rows this time. In a circle. Perfectly spaced, their bodies ringing the house in an unbroken line. Heads twisted inward, eyes locked on the walls as though they could see straight through to me. Their jaws opened and shut in rhythm, not making sound, just clacking like bones knocked together. One circle, every dog facing my home. I backed away, my heart hammering so hard I thought the dogs might hear it. I pressed my back against a wall and slid down until I was sitting on the floor, hammer slipping from my sweat-slick hands. The circle held. Hours passed, and they didn't move. Not an inch. I couldn't bring myself to blow out the candle, but the longer it burned, the more I felt exposed. Their eyes never wavered. At midnight, every head tilted back. The cracking of bones was deafening, hundreds of necks twisting in unison. Their jaws opened wide, and they began clacking again, faster this time, echoing like a typewriter gone mad. The sound hammered into the house from every direction. I pressed my palms to my ears, but it didn't help. The noise was inside me, rattling my chest, scraping against my skull. I screamed without realizing it, my voice swallowed by the endless clacking, and then silence. When I pulled my hands away, the circle was closer. The dogs had moved in unison, every body stepping forward in perfect rhythm. Now they sat just feet from the walls, their breath fogging the boards, the scent of copper and rot wafting through the cracks. I gagged, retched into my hands, but the stink stayed, heavy and cloying. I stumbled into the kitchen, grabbing the biggest knife I had. My legs trembled so bad I almost dropped it. The candle flickered, shadows dancing across the boarded windows. Every shadow looked like a dog's head turning, even though they were already there. Scratching started again, this time on the door. Slow, deliberate strokes, claws carving into the wood, not trying to break in. Not yet, just letting me know they could. I staggered backward, my heels slipping in spilled wax. The knife clattered across the tile. My chest heaved, lungs struggling for air that felt too thin. I don't know how long it lasted. Minutes, hours. Time stopped mattering. The circle stayed unbroken. At some point, I must have passed out against the kitchen counter, knife clutched tight against my chest. When I opened my eyes again, the candle had burned to a puddle, smoke curling into the air. For one terrifying moment, I thought the scratching had stopped because they'd finally come inside. I crawled to the window, heart slamming. Slowly, I peeled back a slat. They were still there. The circle hadn't moved. Dozens of backward heads, jaws slack, eyes fixed on me like they'd been watching the entire time I slept. I froze, breath caught in my throat. For a moment, I thought I saw their jaws twitch wider, as though they were smiling. Then, as one, every head turned. Not toward me this time, toward the street. Through the cracks I saw something move, a man, staggering, clothes torn, blood streaking his chest. His eyes were wide and wild, hair matted with sweat. He stumbled into the circle, gasping, and collapsed against my porch. He beat his fists against the boards. "Let me in, please God, let me in." I scrambled back from the door, knife clutched in white knuckles. My pulse roared in my ears. I wanted to open it. I wanted to drag him inside, away from those eyes. But my body wouldn't move. Fear rooted me in place. The man sobbed, pounding harder. They're waiting for something. I saw it, I swear." His voice broke off. He stiffened, eyes going wide. Slowly his head turned, not by his own will, but by some force jerking it sideways with a sickening pop. He screamed once before the dog surged forward. The circle broke into a frenzy of claws and teeth, tearing into him with wet cracks and ripping flesh. His body vanished beneath the mass, limbs jerking once before going limp. I pressed my hands against my mouth, choking down bile as blood sprayed against the boards, dripping through the cracks onto my floor. The dogs tore him to pieces right outside my door, their bodies slamming against the walls in their frenzy. And then silence again. When they pulled back, what was left of him was arranged neatly on my porch, arms outstretched, legs bent backward, head twisted all the way around, eyes staring through the crack in the door. The dogs reformed the circle, jaws clacking softly, breath rattling. I backed into the kitchen and sank against the counter, knife trembling in my grip, tears stinging my face. They weren't leaving, they were waiting. The circle outside hadn't moved in hours. Their bodies sat stiff in the dark, their heads angled inward, jaws clacking softly in a rhythm that crawled under my skin. I tried to keep my eyes on the door, but exhaustion dragged me down again, every blink longer than the last. The crash jolted me awake. It wasn't the dogs, it was glass. Shards scattered across the kitchen floor, glinting in the weak candlelight. I spun toward the noise, knife raised, breath caught in my throat. A man tumbled through the shattered window above the sink, his body hitting the linoleum with a heavy thud. He scrambled up immediately, bleeding from his arms and face where the glass had cut him, his chest heaving as though he'd run for miles. Don't scream," he gasped, pressing his back against the wall. His eyes were wide, white all the way around. I didn't lower the knife. "They're waiting," he rasped, voice breaking. "They're not just hunting, they're waiting." His whole body trembled. Blood dripped from his fingertips onto the floor, leaving dark dots like breadcrumbs. He pressed his hand against the cut on his forehead, smearing red across his face. "I saw it," he whispered. "I saw what they're waiting for." I opened my mouth to ask, but the sound outside cut me off. The clacking stopped. The silence pressed against the walls like weight. For the first time in days, the dogs weren't making a sound. No claws, no snapping jaws, nothing. The man slid down the wall, clutching his knees to his chest. "It's here," he whispered. "It's coming." The air shifted, heavy and damp. Even through the boarded windows I could feel it. A pressure, low and suffocating, thickening the air in my lungs. Then came the howl, not the reversed screech of the packs. Deeper, louder. It vibrated the glass in the frames, rattled the nails in the boards. The candle flame flattened, flickered, and nearly died. My ears rang until I thought they'd burst. The man clamped his hands over his head, rocking back and forth. "Don't look at it. Don't look at it. Don't." But I couldn't stop myself. I crept to the crack in the boards, every nerve screaming at me not to. Slowly I leaned down and peered through. It stood in the street, twice the size of the others, its ribs bowed outward like broken scaffolding. skin stretched so thin it tore in places, leaking black. Its legs were too long, joints bent backward, claws carving gouges into the asphalt with every step. And its head had twisted so far back that the skull had split the skin entirely. Bone jutted outward like a spear, blood slicking the pale spines of vertebrae that protruded from its neck. Its face stared straight down its own back, jaws unhinged wide enough to split the corners of its mouth. Saliva poured in strings to the ground, sizzling where it hit. The smaller pack circled around it, silent, heads tilted down in perfect submission. I tore away from the crack, heart hammering so hard I thought it might split my ribs. My breath came in shallow gasps, knife trembling in my hand. The man in the kitchen rocked faster, his nails digging bloody crescents into his arms. "It's the Alpha," he muttered. "It tells them where to go. It tells them who to take. We're just cattle waiting for slaughter." His words were drowned out by another howl. This one closer, louder. My teeth ached from the vibration. The boards above the sink rattled as shadows passed by outside. The circle was breaking apart. The smaller dogs were moving in lines, shifting as though forming a path. Through the cracks I saw the Alpha step forward. The others parted, their bodies bowing low, their backward heads pressing into the dirt in some kind of grotesque bow. The Alpha's head swiveled, vertebrae snapping with a sound like wood splitting. Its eyes glowed faintly in the dark, pinning the house, pinning me. The man sobbed, pressing his forehead against the blood-streaked wall. It knows who's left." The Alpha stepped closer. Each movement was wrong, like a puppet being pulled by too many strings. Its legs jerked, spine crackling, head bobbing loosely over its torn neck. The ground shook under its weight, dust rising with every step. The smaller dogs clacked their jaws in unison, a deafening staccato that drilled into my skull. My vision blurred. I stumbled backward, knife slipping from my slick fingers. The man lunged forward, grabbing my arm. His eyes bulged, his breath hot and ragged in my face. "If it looks at you, if it sees you, you're done. Do you understand? It doesn't kill like the others. It fills you up with its noise until you're gone." His words barely sank in before a shadow crossed the window. The boards groaned, nails squealing as the frame bent inward. The Alpha pressed its head against the house, sniffing, its backward jaws dragging wetly across the wood. The dogs clacked harder, my ears filled with white noise. I dropped to my knees, clutching my head, bile burning my throat. The man screamed suddenly, high and piercing, and bolted for the door. Before I could stop him, he tore down the furniture, ripping the chair from the knob, and yanked the door wide open. The circle broke into chaos. Dozens of dogs surged forward, jaws snapping, bones cracking. The man ran screaming into the street, his arms flailing. For a moment, he actually made it past the first line. Then the Alpha moved. Its head snapped sideways with a sound like a tree trunk splitting. It opened its mouth wider than seemed possible, ribs heaving, and let out a howl that blasted the street like a shockwave. The man froze mid-stride, his body convulsed, back arching until I thought his spine would snap. He screamed once, his voice warped, dragged backward like it was being sucked out of him. His eyes rolled white, his jaw hanging loose. Then just like that, he was gone. Not torn apart, not dragged down, just gone. Only his clothes hit the ground, fluttering to the asphalt. The Alpha stood still, head tilted back, black drool pouring from its jaws. The smaller dogs sat again, silent, their heads swiveling back toward my house. I slammed the door shut and shoved the furniture back, my hands shaking so violently I could barely grip anything. My chest heaved, my vision blurred. Outside, the clacking started again, louder, sharper, as though the entire pack was laughing. By the following night, the town was nearly gone. The streets were littered with wrecked cars, furniture dragged outside in panic, windows smashed from desperate barricades. But not many people were left. You could feel the emptiness in the air, too still, too thin, the kind of silence that comes after screaming stops for good. The Alpha hadn't left. It patrolled the streets like it owned them, its massive frame cutting shadows across the buildings, vertebrae jutting out like knives every time it shifted its head. The smaller packs moved around it, no longer scattered or random. They were precise, coordinated, splitting into lines, circling houses, vanishing, and reappearing elsewhere in perfect rhythm. I saw them converge on City Hall just after dark. That's where the last real cluster of people had gone. The building was bigger than any house in town, made of heavy brick with double doors of oak and iron. If anywhere could hold, it was there. I'd seen families dragging mattresses and crates inside all day, carrying lanterns, setting up barricades. Maybe 50 people were crammed inside, everything left of us. From my window, I watched the packs gather. They didn't rush or leap. They walked, deliberate and silent, encircling City Hall the same way they had my house, only on a massive scale. Their backward heads turned in unison toward the doors. Hundreds of eyes glimmered in the lantern light leaking through the cracks. The Alpha came last. Its steps cracked the pavement, each one slow and heavy. It moved into the center of the circle, towering over the others, its torn neck dripping black ropes of spit onto the ground. When it tilted its head, the sound of its vertebrae splitting echoed through the square like gunfire. Inside the building, I could see shadows moving, the muffled rise of voices, a baby crying. Then, silence. The Alpha opened its mouth. The howl that came out wasn't sound, it was pressure, a blast that shook windows, rattled nails loose from wood, bent the iron lamps in the square. My chest seized, air forced from my lungs as though the noise had punched through me. From inside City Hall came answering screams, but not of terror. The front doors opened. One by one, people began to file out. Not running, not fighting, walking. Their faces were slack, eyes glassy, arms loose at their sides. They moved like sleepwalkers, stepping into the circle as though summoned. Children, parents, the old and sick, they all moved the same way, slow, obedient. The smaller dogs parted to make paths for them. People shuffled into those paths without hesitation, vanishing between the rows of twisted bodies. None of them screamed. None of them resisted. Their shadows melted into the dark until they were gone. A man near the back staggered, his eyes flickering like he was waking up. He turned, stumbling, and for a split second he broke into a run. His voice tore out raw. "Help me! Please, help!" The Alpha's head snapped sideways with a crack. The man convulsed, his scream twisting backward in his throat, cut short as his body jerked and collapsed. The smaller dogs dragged him into the dark, leaving nothing behind but a smear on the pavement. The rest kept walking. I couldn't look away. I pressed my face against the boards, bile stinging my throat, watching as every last person inside City Hall emptied out. 50 souls gone in minutes, swallowed by silence. When it was over, the Alpha tilted its skull back, vertebrae splitting further until the head was upside down. Its jaws opened wide enough that the corners tore, drool and black blood pouring onto the ground. The smaller packs sat, perfectly still, heads twisting toward the houses that remained. The message was clear. It wasn't finished. I staggered back from the window, my legs buckling under me. My knees hit the floor hard, but I didn't feel the pain. My ears were ringing from the howl, my vision tunneling. I couldn't stop shaking. The circle around City Hall dissolved, the dogs spreading into new lines, moving block by block, clearing out what was left. Their movements weren't wild anymore. They were purposeful, like a military sweep. I crawled into the kitchen and pressed my back against the counter, clutching the knife so tight my knuckles cracked. Sweat poured down my face, my chest rising and falling like I'd run a mile. Outside I could hear them moving again, claws scraping pavement, jaws clacking in rhythm. Through a crack in the boards, I saw families being led away in pairs. Neighbors I'd known my whole life, their feet dragging across the asphalt, heads hanging low. Dogs pressed close to their sides, shepherding them into the dark like livestock. No screams, no struggle, just compliance. I wanted to shout at them, to tell them to fight, to snap them out of whatever trance the Alpha had cast, but the words died in my throat. Deep down, I knew it wouldn't matter, because when the Alpha howled, even from a distance, I felt it in my bones. That pressure, that suffocating pull, that urge to move whether I wanted to or not. The knife nearly slipped from my hand as my fingers twitched, as if something else was tugging at the strings inside me. I dropped to the floor and pressed my face into the tile, biting down hard on my lip until I tasted blood. Anything to stay present, anything to keep from joining the line outside. Hours passed, the footsteps faded, the voices died away. By dawn, the town was empty, or maybe I was the only one left to notice. By the morning after City Hall, the town was dead. No cars moved, no voices carried, no doors opened. The houses looked like shells, hollow and abandoned, as if people had never lived in them at all. Curtains fluttered in broken windows, but no faces peered out. I was alone, and I knew it. The packs didn't leave. They lingered in the streets, filling every gap, lining every block like a living wall. The Alpha prowled in the center, its massive form dragging shadow wherever it went, its torn spine glistening wet with every movement. The others obeyed its smallest shift, its lowest growl, forming new lines, surrounding new blocks, hunting what little remained. I couldn't stay inside anymore. They would take me like they took the rest. Whether with claws or with whatever force had emptied City Hall, they would find a way. My only chance was to get out. I stuffed a backpack with water, a few cans of food, and the knife. The hammer felt like a child's toy now, but I strapped it to my belt anyway. My hands shook as I pried the boards loose from the back window, splinters cutting into my palms. The glass was already cracked. One good shove with the handle of the hammer sent shards tumbling into the dirt. I slipped outside. The air reeked of rot and wet fur. My stomach clenched at the stench of death hanging over everything, heavy enough to taste. I crouched low, scanning the street. The dogs were everywhere, rows upon rows, their backward heads swiveling, jaws clacking in rhythm. But the sound wasn't random anymore. It pulsed in waves, a code I couldn't understand, passing between them as they moved in eerie unison. I crawled through yards, ducked behind cars, keeping low and silent. Every time I peeked out, I felt eyes on me. No matter where I went, their heads turned toward me in jerks and snaps, spines cracking as though they'd always known where I was. I didn't run. Running was noise. Running was death. I moved slow, creeping toward the edge of town. I could see the highway in the distance, the open stretch of cracked blacktop that led out into the fields. My chest tightened at the sight of it. Freedom, if I could just reach it. Then the howling started, not the packs, the Alpha. The sound tore through the air like a storm, a force so strong it rattled the bones in my chest and sent me sprawling to the dirt. My ears rang, my teeth buzzed in my skull. I clawed at the ground, gasping, fighting to keep myself from screaming. The smaller dogs stopped clacking. Every head turned toward me at once. I ran. I couldn't stop myself this time. My body moved on instinct, lungs burning, legs pumping harder than they ever had. The sound of claws thundered behind me, hundreds of them, ripping into asphalt and dirt, closing the gap. The highway loomed closer. My breath came in sharp, tearing gasps, black spots swimming in my vision. The packs fanned out, cutting across streets, herding me like cattle. The Alpha moved behind them, slower but unstoppable, its howl rolling across the fields in waves that broke me apart inside. I reached the fuel depot at the edge of town. Rows of tanks stood silent, the smell of gasoline heavy in the air. The idea hit me before I could think twice. I sprinted for the nearest tanker, dogs closing in on all sides. My hands fumbled with the valve, twisting, wrenching, until the metal shrieked and gave. Gasoline poured onto the ground, soaking into the dirt, running in streams across the pavement. The reek burned my throat, but I kept going, opening valve after valve until the air was thick with fumes. The first dog lunged. I swung the hammer with everything I had, the head connecting with its skull in a sickening crunch. It dropped, but more came, their jaws snapping inches from my arms, their backward faces jerking toward me with unnatural speed. I fumbled in my pocket, my fingers closing around the last thing I had, a lighter. I flicked it once, twice. The flame caught. The alpha howled again, the force nearly knocking me off my feet. It was closer now, its enormous body blotting out the horizon, its backward skull dripping black as it bore down on me. I dropped the lighter. The world erupted. The blast tore through the depot, fire screaming into the sky, a wall of heat so intense it seared my skin. The ground shuddered, tanks rupturing one after another in a chain of concussive booms. Gasoline ignited in rivers, flames racing across the pavement, swallowing everything. Dogs shrieked in unnatural tones, their howls cut short as fire engulfed them. Their bodies twisted, spines snapping, flesh sloughing from bone. Dozens collapsed into heaps of charred fur and cracked bone, writhing as the flames devoured them. The alpha staggered, its towering form outlined in fire. Its head twisted violently, vertebrae snapping apart under its own weight. It howled again, but the sound was broken now, shattered, warped into something weak. Its massive frame collapsed to one knee, flames crawling up its ribs, black ichor spilling onto the ground in thick rivers. I ran. The blast had cleared a path through the packs, their bodies burning, writhing, breaking apart in the flames. I sprinted down the highway, lungs tearing, skin blistered, smoke filling my mouth. Behind me the town burned, the air thick with the screams of dying things. I didn't look back. Not until I was miles down the highway, the sun rising red over the horizon. My legs gave out, and I collapsed in the gravel, chest heaving, throat raw. The town was a silhouette against the fire, smoke pouring into the sky. For a long moment I thought it was over. Then, faintly, carried on the wind, I heard it. A howl, low, weak, but still alive. I pushed myself to my feet, staggering down the highway, every step dragging, every breath a knife in my chest. I didn't stop. Not for the smoke, not for the silence, not for the knowledge that something was still out there. I had survived. But the backward dogs were not gone. Weeks later, I still smell the gasoline. It clings to me, sunk into my skin. No matter how many showers I take, I don't sleep more than an hour at a time. Every time I close my eyes, I see their heads twisting, bones splitting, jaws snapping in silence. The town was declared a disaster site. Gas explosion, they said. Everyone gone, no survivors. I kept walking when I heard that on the radio, too afraid to tell them I was still alive. Too afraid to explain what really happened, because I can still hear them. When the night is quiet enough, when the wind shifts just right, there's a sound beneath the crickets and the distant hum of the highway. A wet clack, like jaws snapping shut, and sometimes, faint on the horizon, a howl that rises and bends backward in my ears. They didn't die in that fire. They're out there waiting for something else, and I don't know if I'll ever stop running.